They say every recipe hides a story, but what if yours could rewrite the past? Jules Costa had everything: fame, followers, and the perfect life online, until one mistake burned it all down. Now back in her family's olive farm in Italy, she finds a mysterious cookbook that only reveals its pages when her heart is ready to face the truth. Each recipe uncovers a secret. Each secret brings her closer to the boy she lost and the woman she's meant to become. But the final recipe, the orange blossom cake, holds something she never expected: the truth about love, forgiveness, and the kind of magic that only comes when you're brave enough to start again. The Italian countryside looked like a painting that had learned how to breathe. Rolling green hills stretched endlessly beneath a blue sky. Olive trees shimmered silver under the afternoon sun, and the air smelled faintly of rosemary and dust. Jules leaned her forehead against the train window, watching the familiar world she'd left behind 10 years ago unfold again: the cobblestone roads, the red-tiled rooftops, and the distant shimmer of Lake Garda. Home! The word felt both comforting and foreign. When she stepped off the train, the heat wrapped around her like an embrace. A small figure waved from across the platform: Aunt Rosa, short and round, her smile as bright as the sun. Jules hadn't realized how much she'd missed that face until she saw it again. "Cara mia," Rosa cried, pulling her into a hug that smelled like flour and lemons. "You've become too thin." "Los Angeles feeds no one properly," Jules laughed softly. "It fed my ego for a while." "Ah," Rosa said knowingly, "and now it's time to feed your heart again." They drove through the narrow winding roads, toward the Costa family olive farm, a sprawling old villa that sat between endless rows of trees. The same house where Jules had learned to bake as a child, standing on a stool beside her grandmother. As the car turned the final corner, Jules saw it, the familiar house, golden in the sunlight, the shutters open, the scent of bread drifting from the windows. For a moment, time folded in on itself. She was 10 years old again, covered in flour, her grandmother's laughter echoing in the kitchen. Inside, nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The kitchen was smaller than she remembered. The tiles cracked, the wooden table worn smooth by time. On the shelf above the stove sat something she hadn't seen in years: a leather-bound cookbook with faded gold letters, her grandmother's cookbook. Jules ran her fingers over it and smiled faintly. "I thought this was gone." Rosa looked at her strangely. "It disappears sometimes," she said, half joking. "Then it comes back when it wants to be used." Jules frowned. "When it wants to be used?" Rosa just shrugged, humming as she unpacked groceries. "Some things in this house have their own will, Cara. You'll see." That night, unable to sleep, Jules sat alone at the kitchen table, the cookbook in front of her. She opened it gently, expecting to see blank pages filled with dust and memories. Instead, she found one recipe written in her grandmother's delicate handwriting: orange blossom cake, for when you've forgotten what sweetness tastes like. Her chest tightened. It was the same recipe she had tried to recreate on livestream, the one she'd burned. Only this time, it felt like the recipe was calling her, as if it had been waiting for her to come home. Morning came with the scent of citrus and sunlight. Jules woke to the sound of birds and the low hum of bees outside her window. For the first time in years, there were no alarms, no schedules, no notifications blinking her awake, just quiet. She dressed simply, white cotton shirt, hair tied back, and wandered to the kitchen, drawn again to the old cookbook waiting on the counter. The leather cover seemed darker today, the pages slightly ajar as if something inside had been restless overnight. She hesitated before opening it. Part of her felt foolish. It was just paper and ink. And yet a strange anticipation flickered in her chest. The same feeling she used to get before a live show, when everything could go wrong, or perfectly right. She opened the book. A faint golden light shimmered across the page, just for a heartbeat. Then words appeared, handwritten but new. To find the flavor of the truth, begin where sweetness turned to ash. Jules blinked, heart racing. The page had been blank the night before. She glanced around. The kitchen empty, only sunlight pouring in. She ran her fingers across the ink. It didn't smudge. "This can't be real," she whispered. But it was. Underneath the strange line, a recipe slowly began to reveal itself. The same orange blossom cake, only slightly different this time. Ingredients shifted. Notes appeared in the margins. One in particular caught her eye. "Add 1 drop of orange blossom water for every memory you wish to remember." Her hands trembled as she followed the instructions. She found the bottle her grandmother had once used, nearly empty. Its label faded. She poured a single drop into the bowl and instantly the air changed. The scent was overwhelming and bright, floral, bittersweet. For a second she felt dizzy, and then she wasn't in the kitchen anymore. The sunlight changed, the colors deepened, and she saw herself as a child again, standing beside her grandmother, laughing as flour dusted her nose. Her grandmother looked young, alive, and full of warmth. "Remember, mia dolcezza," her grandmother said, stirring the batter. "Love is like sugar. It burns if you're careless, but it sweetens everything if you learn when to stop." Then, as quickly as it came, the vision vanished. Jules gasped and dropped the spoon, the sound echoing through the empty kitchen. She stumbled back, breathing hard. The batter bowl sat untouched. The cookbook now closed as if nothing had happened. But Jules knew. Something inside that book was alive, and it wanted her to remember something she'd long forgotten. As she stood there trembling, a shadow passed by the kitchen window, tall, broad-shouldered, and strangely familiar. When she turned to look, the figure was already gone. The knock came just as Jules was washing flour off her hands. 3 soft taps, a pause, then another 2, like an old rhythm she couldn't place. When she opened the door, the morning sunlight fell across a man standing on the porch, tall, sun-browned skin, hair tousled by the sea wind, and eyes that carried too many stories. "Jules," he said. His voice was deep with a trace of an Italian accent. "I wasn't sure you'd really come back." It took her a heartbeat to recognize him. "Niccolo?" she breathed. He smiled, the same uneven smile that had once made her 17-year-old heart race. "Still remember me, huh?" Jules stepped aside, trying to mask the sudden flutter in her chest. "You look older." "So do you," he said, stepping inside. "But maybe a little less lost." The kitchen was still scented with oranges. He paused, taking it in. "You're baking again," he said quietly. "That's good. Your grandmother would be proud." The mention of Nonna made her chest tighten. "I'm not sure about that," Jules murmured. "I barely remember how to bake properly. I was just trying something." Niccolo's gaze landed on the old cookbook lying open on the counter. "Ah, il libro di segreti," he said, his voice softening with awe. "I haven't seen that since we were kids." "You knew about it?" she asked. "Everyone in town knew your grandmother's book was special," he said, lowering his voice. "But I didn't think it still worked." Jules frowned. "Worked? It's just a recipe book." Niccolo's smile was faint, almost sad. That's what everyone thought. Until the day she made the last orange blossom cake. He leaned on the counter, tracing a finger along the book's edge. People said whoever ate that cake saw the truth. Not about others, but about themselves. Jules went still. "That's just an old story." "Maybe," Niccolo said. "But you're here baking again and that book's open. Maybe it's time to find out if the stories were true." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, she felt that same strange shimmer from earlier, the faint hum of magic in the air. Before she could respond, Niccolo's expression changed. "You should be careful," he said quietly. "There are people in town who'd pay anything to get that book." "What people?" He hesitated. "Someone's been asking about it." "A man?" "Said he's from the Historical Conservatory in Milan. But he's not what he seems." Jules felt a chill run down her spine. The book, the message, the vision. now a stranger searching for it. Why would anyone want my grandmother's recipes? She asked. Niccolo met her gaze. Because they're not just recipes, Jules, they're memories, and someone out there wants to rewrite them. A quiet fell between them, heavy and full of meaning. Then, gently, Niccolo smiled again, breaking the tension. Come on, he said softly. Let's make some coffee. I think you'll need it. The knock came just as Jules was washing flour off her hands. 3 soft taps, a pause, then another 2, like an old rhythm she couldn't place. When she opened the door, the morning sunlight fell across a man standing on the porch, tall, sun-browned skin, hair tousled by the sea wind, and eyes that carried too many stories. Jules, he said. His voice was deep with a trace of an Italian accent. I wasn't sure you'd really come back. It took her a heartbeat to recognize him. Niccolo? She breathed. He smiled, the same uneven smile that had once made her 17-year-old heart race. Still remember me, huh? Jules stepped aside, trying to mask the sudden flutter in her chest. You look older. So do you, he said, stepping inside. But maybe a little less lost. The kitchen was still scented with oranges. He paused, taking it in. You're baking again, he said quietly. That's good. Your grandmother would be proud. The mention of Nonna made her chest tighten. I'm not sure about that, Jules murmured. I barely remember how to bake properly. I was just trying something. Niccolo's gaze landed on the old cookbook lying open on the counter. Ah, il libro di segreti, he said, his voice softening with awe. I haven't seen that since we were kids. You knew about it? She asked. Everyone in town knew your grandmother's book was special, he said, lowering his voice. But I didn't think it still worked. Jules frowned. Worked? It's just a recipe book. Niccolo's smile was faint, almost sad. That's what everyone thought. Until the day she made the last orange blossom cake. He leaned on the counter, tracing a finger along the book's edge. People said whoever ate that cake saw the truth. Not about others, but about themselves. Jules went still. That's just an old story. Maybe, Niccolo said. But you're here baking again and that book's open. Maybe it's time to find out if the stories were true. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, she felt that same strange shimmer from earlier, the faint hum of magic in the air. Before she could respond, Niccolo's expression changed. You should be careful, he said quietly. There are people in town who'd pay anything to get that book. What people? He hesitated. Someone's been asking about it. A man? Said he's from the Historical Conservatory in Milan. But he's not what he seems. Jules felt a chill run down her spine. The book, the message, the vision. Now a stranger searching for it. Why would anyone want my grandmother's recipes? She asked. Niccolo met her gaze. Because they're not just recipes, Jules, they're memories. And someone out there wants to rewrite them. A quiet fell between them, heavy and full of meaning. Then, gently, Niccolo smiled again, breaking the tension. Come on, he said softly. Let's make some coffee. I think you'll need it. The cafe was nearly empty that afternoon. Only the sound of the old ceiling fan and the soft hum of an Italian ballad playing on the radio. Jules sat by the window, a half-empty cup of cappuccino in front of her. She'd come to clear her head. Instead, she found herself tracing the edges of the old cookbook resting in her bag, as if it were alive, pulsing faintly with her heartbeat. Niccolo's warning echoed in her mind. Someone's been asking about it. The door chimed softly. A man walked in. He was dressed in a dark suit, too formal for the sleepy coastal town. His hair slicked back, his eyes cold and precise. Like a man who never asked questions he didn't already know the answers to. He approached the counter, ordered a black espresso, then turned his gaze toward Jules. Their eyes met. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Julia Moreno? He asked. Her stomach twisted. Yes, who's asking? He extended a hand, his tone polite but distant. Leonardo Marchetti, Historical Conservatory of Milan. I believe you have something that belongs to us. Jules blinked. I think you're mistaken. He tilted his head slightly. An old book. Leather cover. Faded orange ribbon. Your grandmother's name written inside. Her pulse spiked. It's just a family keepsake. Leonardo's gaze hardened. That keepsake contains original recipes from the 1930s. Culinary manuscripts that disappeared after the war. Your grandmother's cafe was built on them. Jules forced a smile. Then I guess she built something beautiful from someone else's leftovers. For the first time, a flicker of irritation crossed his face. "Miss Moreno," he said softly, "things have value beyond sentiment. The conservatory compensates fairly, but if the book is lost, certain complications may arise." He placed a sleek business card on her table and leaned closer. "Some memories," he whispered, "should stay forgotten." Then he left, and as quietly as he came, Jules sat frozen. The card on the table shimmered faintly, catching the light. She turned it over and gasped. Beneath the conservatory's logo, in delicate handwriting, were words she recognized instantly. "The heart remembers what the mind forgets," her grandmother's phrase. The cafe door shut, and the scent of oranges filled the air again. Soft, sweet, and eerily familiar. From across the street, Niccolo appeared, watching through the window. His eyes met hers, full of warning. He mouthed a single word. "Run!" The storm hit at midnight. Winds howled against the shutters, rain tapping furiously like impatient fingers. Jules stood in the kitchen, her grandmother's kitchen, barefoot, trembling, and surrounded by the soft glow of candlelight. The cookbook lay open on the counter, its pages fluttering wildly in the draft, revealing a handwritten recipe she had never seen before. "Torta di fiori d'arancio, for the one you cannot forget." The word seemed to shimmer. The ink was new. Her breath caught. "Nonna?" she whispered into the empty air. A memory rose, her grandmother's voice, soft and wistful. "Love is a flavor, Julia. It lingers long after it's gone." Jules gathered ingredients like she was gathering courage. Flour, eggs, orange zest, and sugar. Each motion felt guided, like invisible hands were steadying hers. The storm outside grew louder, but her heart was louder still. As she poured the batter, she noticed something tucked inside the back cover of the book, an old photo. Her grandmother, standing beside a man in a chef's uniform. Behind them, a cafe sign in Italian. La Fiore di Marzo, Milan, 1943. Her pulse raced. The man in the photo was Leonardo Marchetti's grandfather. Suddenly it clicked. The conservatory wasn't after the recipe for profit. They were protecting a secret her grandmother had stolen, or perhaps saved, during the war. The oven timer ticked. The scent of oranges filled the room, sweet and nostalgic. And then faintly she heard footsteps behind her. "Still baking in the storm, Miss Moreno?" Leonardo's voice. She turned, clutching the cookbook to her chest. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to see," he said softly. "If you'd finish what she started." He stepped closer, the candlelight flickering across his face, no longer cold but conflicted. "My grandfather loved your grandmother, Julia. They created that cake together, but when the city burned, she fled and took the only copy of the recipe with her." Jules blinked back tears. "So she didn't steal it?" Leonardo nodded. "She saved it. From men who would have destroyed it, and her." Silence filled the kitchen, thick and aching. The storm outside began to fade. He looked down at the steaming cake on the counter. "May I?" he asked quietly. She nodded. They each took a bite. The flavor bloomed instantly. Orange blossom, honey, and something else. Something like grief. Leonardo closed his eyes. "It tastes like goodbye," he murmured. Jules smiled faintly. "Or like forgiveness." They stood there in the glow of candlelight, two souls connected by a recipe older than their pain. As dawn broke, Jules placed the cookbook on the windowsill. The final page fluttered open one last time. In her grandmother's faded handwriting, "Every secret has a sweetness, if you're brave enough to taste it." 1 year later, the old cafe on Via Marconi smelled of oranges again. The wooden beams gleamed under morning light. The tables were freshly painted, and a hand-carved sign hung over the door. La Fiore di Marzo, reborn. Jules wiped her hands on her apron, glancing at the photo wall. Her grandmother's smile beamed down beside. Leonardo's grandfather, black and white, but somehow alive in every color that filled the room today. It wasn't just a cafe anymore. It was a memory, rebuilt from ashes and regret. She turned just as Leonardo entered, carrying a box of fresh oranges. "Good morning, Chef Costa," he teased, his grin softer than she remembered. "Good morning, Chef Marchetti," she replied, matching his smirk. They worked in silence for a while, a language only shared by those who've known both love and loss. The rhythm of baking replaced the rhythm of old pain, whisks against bowls, flour against air, heartbeats sinking in the space between them. When the first customer entered, an elderly woman, Jules placed a slice of the orange blossom cake before her. "Family recipe?" the woman asked, smiling. Jules nodded. "Passed down from someone who believed sweetness survives anything." The woman took a bite, Her eyes softened. Then she was right. Outside, the Italian sun poured through the windows like forgiveness itself. Leonardo joined her at the counter, brushing a strand of flour from her cheek. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "Maybe we stop calling it her recipe." Jules blinked. "What do you mean?" He smiled. "Maybe it's ours now." Her breath caught, not from surprise but from understanding. It wasn't about the cake, or even their family's history. It was about what they chose to do with the pain they inherited, whether to repeat it or remake it. The bell above the door chimed again. More customers entered, the cafe filled with chatter, laughter, the clinking of cups, life returning one sound at a time. Jules looked at Leonardo, her eyes glistening. "You think they'd be proud?" "I think," he said, taking her hand, "they'd finally rest." They stood together in the warm golden light, surrounded by the scent of oranges and memory, not as enemies of the past, but as healers of it. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Jules wrote a new line at the back of the old cookbook before closing it forever. For those who lost everything, and baked something beautiful anyway.